Imagine a situation whereby you've been out of the country for 10 years, or rather a long time, and you come back to your home country and things are just not the same way they used to be. You feel different, you have a hard time adjusting to the home culture, and generally everything feels different. In fact, you feel like a foreigner in your home country. This type of culture shock is often not talked about, since how can somebody experience culture shock in his own culture? This, ladies and gentlemen, is what we refer to as reverse culture shock.
Reverse culture shock is a psychological and emotional feeling of distress often experienced by people who have been separated from their home cultures for a significant amount of time. It comes from the unexpected difficulty encountered while trying to readjust to the cultural norms and values back home. Exposure to a different culture for an extended amount of time is bound to skew the image we have of our own culture. Readjusting becomes more complicated, and our once entirely familiar place suddenly seems strange and foreign. The extent of the difference between the cultures is significant. The bigger the difference between the culture back home and the foreign culture is, the higher the degree of reverse culture shock experienced. Finally, the amount of communication maintained with people from one's home culture, such as friends and family, is important. Inadequate regular dialogue between people abroad and people back home makes detachment in favor of the new culture more comfortable, especially if the people back home express disinterest in the new experiences one would like to share.
You may be asking yourself, how is it possible to experience culture shock in your own country? We surveyed anonymous people who experienced reverse culture shock, and we're going to read out their responses verbatim.
When I came back to Kenya after 11 years of living in the States, I was in disbelief and saddened by the level of poverty and despair in the hospitals. I was troubled by the amount of suffering and death that was going on. Most of all, I was shocked by the nonchalance with which the local medical workers reacted. I experienced extreme frustration with the inefficiencies and shortcomings of healthcare in Kenya compared to the USA. When I visited the hospitals, it was common to see 3 or more patients sharing a bed, while a nurse was expected to take care of 20 or more critically ill patients. This was different compared to the USA. I felt feelings of disappointment, anxiety, frustration, and ultimately disdain while I was trying to readjust to the environment of my own culture after spending a long time in a different country.
When I came back to Kenya after 20 years of living in Canada, I was filled with disbelief by the unhidden and uncouth corrupt behavior that our Kenyan traffic police officers are condoning on our Kenyan roads. Corruption is done at broad daylight as conductors are ready to exchange some few notes at the expense of breaking some rules, thereby risking our lives as well. In Canada, this is unheard of, as traffic lawbreakers are apprehended. They are given receipts in order to account for their reckless behavior by the roadside. As a Kenyan and as a driver, frustration, anxiety are some of the words that epitomize the culture that I am ready to be assimilated in.
And so I took the opportunity to interview a former and retired veterinary surgeon who worked, lived, and studied in Scotland for 24 years, and this was his response. When I came back to Kenya in 2016, having stayed and worked in Scotland for nearly 24 years, I had a very hard time adjusting back to my home culture. I had gotten used to clean streets, no traffic jams, lack of congested cities and towns, and proper medical facilities. And so I organized a doctor's appointment for my mother to one of the local hospitals. A long queue awaited us once we got there. I remember we waited for close to 1.5 hours just to get to see the doctor. Once we were in the consultation room, the doctor seemed not to bother about the quality of his work, since he never even checked upon my mother. Upon completion of the checkup, he prescribed some drugs to us, which we were supposed to get them from the local pharmacy. Once me and my mother got there, we were told that there are no drugs there, which forced me and my mother to go an extra 2 kilometers just to get to a chemist which has the prescribed drug. The change of countries really did a number on me, since I also had to get used to rubbish on the roads, congested roads, and poorly constructed roads.
Hi, I'm a 24-year-old Kenyan student abroad. Over the last 3 years, I have lived in South Korea, India, Germany, Argentina, and California. I would not say I have experienced reverse culture shock to the magnitude at which people who have stayed outside the country for longer have, but there are definitely aspects about my home culture that shocked me when I came back home. For instance, the concept of public transport is understood differently in all parts of the world. I was shocked to realize that when I came back home, public transport is considered a means of transport for people who belong to the lower class of the society. This wasn't the case in Germany and Argentina. The issue of security was also a bit difficult to adapt to. I was surprised to realize that you cannot leave your personal items out in the public and expect to find them when you come back. Another topic that shocked me was the relationship between people and figures of authority. Back home, people view figures of authority as unapproachable, which is not the case in other parts of the world. In California, people have very friendly relationships with people that are meant to be their leaders.
Why does reverse culture shock happen? It happens because people come back home after immersing themselves in a different culture for a number of years and they have to readjust. Its negative effects while readapting to the environment of our own culture after spending a long time in a different country with different cultures. How does someone know they have experienced reverse culture? First, you experience reverse homesickness. This is whereby you want to go back to the country you are in, since everything feels so different in your own country. You also feel isolated. This is whereby you don't feel at home and you feel like a foreigner in your own country. You also realize that relationships have changed and you don't relate with your friends and family very well, not as before. Reverse culture shock presents itself in many different ways and can be drawn out by different means.